Yo! Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete and detailed Navia guide. Navia is the newest 5-star released in version 4.3 of Genshin Impact, and she shines as being a unique 5-star Geo DPS character. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about Navia concerning her best builds, teams, rotations, and more. We're going to talk about best artifacts, weapons, different team comps, playstyles, cover constellations, and more, as well as including a C0 showcase. As always, I get to give you guys a full guide as soon as possible because I had a bit of time to play her before she came out on a media server. And as always, I want to let you know that I do stream most nights on Twitch. Link in the description if you're interested in catching me live. With that out of the way, let's talk about Navia. Alright, so starting things off, what does Navia actually do and how do you get the most value out of her? First of all, Navia's elemental skill is the central part of her kit. This ability will fire off her Gunbrella, firing off multiple Rosula shard shots in front of her, with the exact amount scaling up based on how many stacks of her crystal shrapnel you have. What these crystal shrapnel stacks are is very simply just a stack that you get as you crystallize and pick up the elemental shard that this reaction creates, shielding your character, and whenever you pick one up on any party member, Navia will gain one stack, with there being a maximum of 6 stacks at once. Now, for each of these stacks that you have, Navia's elemental skill will effectively just be a lot more efficient. In fact, the first 3 stacks you gain will increase how many Rosula shard shots you fire in your sort of shotgun-like pattern. At 0 stacks, you'll fire 5, and this will scale all the way up to 11 if you have 3 stacks. Additionally, when all 11 of these shard shots hit a specific opponent, 200% of your original damage will be dealt, which basically means your scaling is just doubled. And so you really want to make sure you are firing 11 shots, meaning you need at least 3 crystal shrapnel stacks. Now, there's a little more than meets the eye to this. However, as the exact amount of damage you'll be dealing will scale up based on how many shots you hit. This isn't written here, but I'll put the numbers on screen. How many of your shots hit an opponent will greatly increase your damage, so be very mindful of this when using your skill. Now, for each additional stack you have past 3, so 4, 5, or 6 stacks, you'll get an additional 15% damage bonus, which is nice. You can get 45% damage bonus from this, meaning that in practice, if you can get 6 stacks, go for it. Whereas at the very least, you want to have 3 stacks before using your skill, as this will give you more shots on your skill and therefore way more damage. Now, something that was a bit confusing to me that I want to clarify is that your elemental skill is actually 1 hit of damage, even though it fires multiple shots. Now, yes, it can hit multiple enemies at once, but for each enemy, they will take 1 instance of damage based on how many shots hit them and how many stacks are consumed. This means that if 2 pellets, 5 pellets, or 11 pellets hit an enemy, you will still just see 1 geo number from your Rosula shard shot, but how much damage it's dealing will scale up significantly. Now, with that in mind, you can also hold this ability, and when you do so, you enter an aiming mode where the crystallized shards you created will be dragged towards you. This is a very efficient thing to do when there's crystallized shards all around you and you don't want to like run through them all, wasting a bunch of time. You can hold your elemental skill on Navia, they'll get dragged towards you, and then you can fire off your skill and consuming all of the stacks that you gained through holding it. This is very useful to do if you're not fully stacked, and you can do a short hold where you let go of it very fast once enough crystallized shards reach you. It's also worth noting that Navia's elemental skill has 2 charges and a relatively low cooldown of 9 seconds, and this is very important as having 2 skills of this very powerful ability is great for starting out the fight, firing it twice, and then having your skill constantly regenerating and gaining charges throughout the fight, even if your Navia is off field. Your elemental skill also has an Usia aligned damage as a nice little bonus. The main thing that's nice about her elemental skill though is really how high her scaling can be and how much damage you can deal. It's honestly super impressive on a pretty low cooldown with 2 charges, provided you are stacking it and using it correctly. Now, additional really cool things about this ability are that first of all, you actually gain Geo Infusion for 4 seconds after using your skill. This Geo Infusion will apply to your normal, charge, and plunge attacks, making them all deal Geo damage, and you will also gain a 40% damage bonus. This is really nice as it means that you can use your skill on Navia and then on-field her for a bit, normal attack for up to 4 seconds, with all of your attacks being infused with Geo. You can also spread this out between your skill casts to effectively get 8 seconds of infusion if you use your skill twice, or 12 if you use it 3 times, allowing you to spend some time on field with her and actually make her normal attacks useful. Additionally, for the last thing I wanted to mention regarding your skill is that regarding your crystal shrapnel charges, you can also get a few additional bonus stacks through your burst. In fact, to talk about Navia's burst, it's a pretty simple ability that will deal a hit of AoE Geo damage as she uses it, and then will have cannon fire continuously supporting her. her. This will basically rain down shots of geo damage from the sky, dealing damage and helping with applying geo and proccing the crystallized reaction a bit easier, lasting for 12 seconds with a 15-second cooldown. This ability is not a field, it's literally just cannon fire that supports her, meaning that if you run around, fight new enemies, or even teleport somewhere else, the cannon fire will follow you. This ability also, as I mentioned, will generate crystal shrapnel for you up to 1 stack every 2.4 seconds as your cannons hit opponents. This makes it a very nice ability to have for more crystallizes and more stacks overall, and some nice passive damage as well, so definitely something that you don't want to be neglecting, even though most of your damage will come from your skill. I also wanted to mention that Navia's burst does not snapshot, so you can't give it any buffs for its entire duration. It will continuously scale with your Navia stats. Additionally, for Navia's kit, you also get free attack percent through a passive talent, 20% attack for each pyro, electro, cryo, or hydro party member you have, which are all the elements that can proc crystallize with geo, so it lines up, stacking up to 2 times, effectively giving you 40% attack in most Navia teams for free. You're going to be running these elements with her pretty much anyways, alongside maybe another geo character, and even if you're running 2 geos and then 2 characters of these elements, you will still fully stack this passive and get a nice 40% attack for free. Lastly, before we talk about Navia's playstyle, regarding her talent priority, you want to maximize her skill, as this is really a huge scaling that will be a big chunk of her damage, and then afterwards, if you use her on field and are normal attacking on her, you can level her normals and then her burst, whereas if you play her in a more quick swappy role and you're not spending as much time on her, then level her burst second and her normal attack last. Now, because of Navia's very unique kit, she has a very unique playstyle. The main reasons for this are the following. First of all, her elemental skill is going to be a big part of her kit, and she can have 2 charges of it. Because the scaling is so high and such a core part of her gameplay, having 2 charges that you can stack up even from off field, swap into her and use for a lot of damage, makes it easy for her to kind of swap in and swap out, as long as you make sure to weave in that big chunk of damage, on top of also using her burst. Now, what really makes her playstyle unique though, is that her normal attacks will be geo infused, as we saw, for 4 seconds after using your skill. Since you have 2 charges of your skill, you can effectively extend this, doing 4 seconds of normal attacks per skill cast, being able to do this actually for 8 seconds in a rotation. If you use your skill, attack a bit, then use another skill, and then attack a bit again. What this leaves us with is 2 sort of playstyles, one where you could use her as a very quick swap sort of sub DPS, and another one, the more standard one, where you'd be using her as a on-field DPS character, but one who wouldn't have as much field time requirements as some others. In fact, you'd only be normal attacking on her when you're geo infused, as you don't want to be doing some physical normal attacks that really won't be doing a lot of damage. Now, the main unique part of Navia's playstyle though, that I really want to make clear, is that the geo infusion isn't that long, right? It's only 4 seconds per skill cast, meaning that you won't need to be on her for as long as most traditional DPSs, but she still wants to be on field enough to where she's in this sort of weird mid-range of field time. Because of this, you'll also spend a great amount of time on your other characters, generating energy and dealing good damage on your other characters as well, before and after doing your attacks on Navia. And even fit in elemental bursts that you might not have otherwise used, like for example Zhongli or Albedo's bursts, which are good, but sometimes you're not even building them for it, especially Zhongli. A lot of times you use Zhongli just for his shield and not his burst, but with Navia, you can actually have the time in your rotation to drop that meteor on enemies that can actually deal pretty decent damage, especially if he's buffed. Navia is therefore really flexible. The fact that you can swap in and out of her a lot easier, have a lot of burst damage, and have the convenience to do either short or long rotations is definitely one of Navia's biggest strengths. With that in mind, Navia is also a character who synergizes very well with another geo character in the team for many reasons, such as lowering her ER requirements by a lot, allowing her to spam her burst while focusing her build on damage. Another geo character with a geo construct or just geo damage will allow her to crystallize a lot more, being more consistent for her skill and basically all of her kit, as she's a character who synergizes very well with the crystallized reaction. On top of that, you'll get the powerful geo resonance and have another geo character that can act as a battery. Now, do be careful with your geo constructs though, as you want to make sure they're generating energy for you without getting destroyed by bosses, which can be annoying. For example, here, for some reason, this ice skater just slashed my pillar, which makes no sense and very much upset me. And very shortly after, when I wanted to place another pillar, the dancer decided, hey, let me just skate through the pillar and break it instantly. Additionally, running Navia with just one other geo character allows her to slot in 2 characters of elements that can be crystallized in the last 2 slots, allowing you to spam crystallize and usually have a team with a lot of synergy. There will be much more specific information in the team section of this video though, so stay tuned for that. With that out of the way, here are some advanced tips, rotation advice, and ways to get more value out of your Navia generally speaking. First of all, in your rotation, you want to typically be using Navia's burst near or at the start of it. This is important to passively gain stacks for your elemental skill on top of crystallizing enemies through this geo cannon fire. This is also true with other constructs from other geo supports you may be running, like Zhongli or Albedo, that you would want to use at the beginning as well. well. For Navia, you want to be normal attacking for the 4 seconds after your skill if you plan on using her like a main DPS, and there are many combos you can do here depending on when you need to dash, but personally I do like using her third normal attack as it is a nice multi-hit that you can dash cancel and do 2 normals afterwards before then using your second skill cast. Your rotations will vary heavily in length because of how flexible Navia's field time requirements are, but typically you'll be doing 2 skill casts per rotation. Sometimes you can weave in a third skill cast for a longer rotation, but typically this is mainly going to be used as a way to extend your rotation and finish off low health enemies and clear whatever content you're doing. Having the option to extend your rotation to finish off enemies with a huge source of damage that is your skill is a big upside to clear some content without having to do a whole new rotation. Regarding her skill, I also want to mention that short holding it is great, as we talked about earlier, and this is typically what I recommend because it drags any extra crystals that are around to you, on top of letting you aim a bit better and make sure the enemies that you're fighting are all grouped up so that you can hit them all with your skill. You can also do this by just tapping your skill if the enemies are in front of you, but obviously you won't drag any crystals to you. Lastly, for my thoughts on Navia thus far, I genuinely really enjoy her, and I think a lot of people will see a satisfying huge number on her skill because of how front-loaded her damage is and how big you can actually hit on each skill if you're using it correctly, and honestly enjoy it quite a lot. I find her very satisfying and also strong as a main DPS. If you like her playstyle, then you can consider going for her. Obviously with DPS characters, it's always like that. You should pick one who you enjoy, but damage-wise, she definitely can hit like a truck and is a surprisingly satisfying, enjoyable, and powerful Geo DPS. I have genuinely had a fun time playing her, as once I started building and playing her correctly, everything kind of just evaporated. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's talk about how to build your Navia to get the most value out of her. Well, starting things off, Navia's best in slot is going to be the new set released alongside of her, the Nighttime Whispers in Echoing Woods. This set with a long name will give you a ton of stats, being 18% attack and up to 50% geo damage bonus, provided you can make use of this 4-piece set, and Navia generally can. In fact, while the attack percent is free on the 2-piece, the geo damage bonus will come from using your skill and also being protected by a crystallized shield, which is something that you should be doing anyways in a Navia team for reasons we mentioned earlier, as her kit does inherently have a lot of synergy with crystallized on top of this artifact set as well. Because of this, you will get a lot of buffs. It'll buff all of your damage after using your first skill, and 50% geo damage bonus on top of some attack is really a lot of stats that will make this her general go-to best in slot. Now do keep in mind that this new domain isn't the most resin efficient, but if you do plan on maining Navia, then it will be your go-to set as it is your best in slot. With that in mind, however, I want to also mention a few other sets. First of all, the Maréchaussée Hunter is going to be your best in slot if you do play Navia with Farina, as she will constantly drain your HP, allowing you to get good uptime on the 4-piece Maréchaussée, giving you 15% normal and charge attack damage, as well as 36% crit rate, which is just an insane amount of stats. This set will be slightly better than Nighttime and in a much more resin efficient domain, but again, only recommended to use if you are running Farina alongside your Navia. Now for some alternative sets other than those two, the 4-piece Golden Troop, which is a set that comes in the same domain as Maréchaussée, is going to be a viable alternative for your Navia as a set that will increase your skill damage by a lot. You get 45% skill damage when you're on field and 70% both when you're off field and also for the first 2 seconds when you swap into your Navia. What this means is you can get all of this damage bonus as soon as you swap in and press your skill, and then for the remaining of your rotation, if you stay on field for your Navia for a long time, you'll get 45% elemental skill damage bonus, making your Gunbrella just deal massive amounts of damage and making it honestly a fine and viable alternative to the Nighttime set if you don't want to farm it or don't have a good one, as it is brand new. With that in mind, a pretty decent alternative that can be very easy to just get and use is going to be mix and matching 2-piece sets like 2-piece Golden Troop for skill damage with 2-piece Petra for geo damage bonus, or even any of the 2-piece sets that give you attack percent, mix and matching them based on your substats, being a very easy build to get, at least as a placeholder until you get her best sets. Also, regarding the 4-piece Petra, this set will increase your off-field character's damage, but your Navia's personal damage will suffer quite a bit, so I don't recommend this for most Navia playstyles. It's not great for her, but it can help buff your team's damage if you want her to have a more supportive role, so not a set that I recommend, but at least one that I wanted to talk about for certain teams. Overall, Navia has a lot of powerful sets to increase her personal damage, with a new one designed for her. Now for the stats you want on your Navia, it's actually very straightforward. First of all, Navia's Elemental Burst is a relevant part of her kit that you usually want to be using, so having enough energy recharge to use your burst when it's up is going to be something to look for. How much you need will vary heavily based on your team and rotation, but generally in a recommended Navia team where you typically will run her with another Geo character that can help her get more energy, you won't need that much energy recharge, with her general range being around 120 to 140 ER, but it could also be as low as 110 or as high as 150 based on how many times you use your skill per rotation, what characters are in your team, and how much energy they generate. So again, test out what works for you, but 120 to 140 in a double Geo team is a nice and comfy range, with you sometimes in practice needing even less on your Navia if you're on field on on her a lot and can kill enemies rapidly, you can end up getting a lot of bonus energy, allowing you to run less ER in practice, depending on the content. Now, if you're running Navia as a solo Geo, you will need a lot more ER, generally around 160 to 180, if you want to get your burst up as often as possible, but for most players, this won't be too big of an issue, as in a standard double Geo Navia team, you really don't need that much energy recharge. Now, once you do have enough, the rest is very straightforward. You want to go for crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent to maximize your damage. Those are the substats you're going to be looking for, and as for your main stats, you want attack percent on your sands, Geo damage bonus on your goblet, and crit rate or crit damage on your circlet. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Navia's best weapons. Now, you should be happy to hear that Navia has quite a few good weapons, a great signature, an amazing battle pass option, and also good free-to-play options, meaning that everyone has a weapon that they can use for Navia. Starting things off with their signature, Verdict, which is a literal axe, which I find absolutely sick, is just a pretty big stat stick for your Navia. You'll get 674 base attack, which is a really high base attack, on top of 22% crit rate and 20% attack for free. If that wasn't enough, as you crystallize and pick up the shields, you will easily gain up to 36% elemental skill damage bonus, disappearing when your skill deals damage, but you can basically have this for every skill cast, provided you pick up 2 crystallized shields, use your skill, and then just do it again, and Navia's hold skill, as we saw, will pick up those shards, so a pretty consistent effect and just a lot of stats, making it her general best in slot. With that in mind, a weapon that can come scarily close and sometimes potentially even be slightly better is actually going to be a fully refined Serpent Spine, which is the battle pass weapon that you can get if you buy it. Now, while I don't think you need to buy the battle pass or anything just for a weapon, the Serpent Spine is a great 4-star option that is one of Navia's best weapons, even without refinements, but getting much better the more you refine it, as it's a weapon that just gives you a ton of damage percent. In fact, you will gain up to 30% damage at R1 and 50% damage at R5 through the Serpent Spine passive, as long as you just stay on field, stack it up, and then start attacking enemies. You can stack this up easily in the Abyss by just waiting a little bit before starting the chamber, and this paired with the crit rate that you're gaining, 27.6%, makes it an incredible weapon. The main downside of this ability are that, one, its passive can be inconsistent if you take damage a lot, but with a lot of shields, it can actually be a lot easier to protect these stacks and have good uptime on its effect, and two, that Serpent Spine has a very low base attack, but if you're running Navia with attack buffing supports like Bennett, you will get so much attack percent that will greatly increase the value of this weapon, making it one of her strongest weapons. As I said, there are situations where it could technically be your best in slot, assuming your Serpent Spine is fully refined, but even outside of that, and even just in general, even without refinements, Serpent Spine is a great weapon that is typically the best 4-star, and one that I recommend if you don't plan on getting Navia's signature axe. Outside of those two weapons, there are a lot of good options though. There's good 5-star stat sticks that you can use, like Redhorn Stone Thresher or Beacon of the Reed Sea. Other options include pretty much any of the offensive 5-star claymores, like Wolf's Gravestone or Unforged. Moving on for some other 4-stars, I want to start by saying that Navia has great free-to-play options. In fact, the new event weapon, which has a super long name that I don't want to say, is one that you can get and fully refine for free in an upcoming event that will give you a stupid amount of stats. In fact, it has a high base attack of 565, on top of giving you 30% energy recharge and 48% attack at R5. Now, this is a ton of stats just in general, but keep in mind that you will get less attack if you haven't helped Melusines, apparently, which means that you actually have to do world quests, but assuming you've done that, it is just a huge amount of stats that will make it your best free-to-play option if you can use the energy recharge as well. Another really good free-to-play option though, especially if you don't need the ER, is going to be Tidal Shadow, which gives you a huge amount of attack with refinement, provided you are getting healing, which will be easy to do in most of her teams, with Farina, Bennett, or pretty much just any other healer. For some other weapons, I first want to mention the Sacrificial Greatsword, which is a weapon that has almost been useless up until now that can potentially be used on Navia if you can make use of the 30 ER that it's giving you, on top of the extra particles from its effect. This weapon isn't one that I recommend to everyone, but is one that I can recommend under a few conditions, especially if you're playing Navia without other Geo characters or are in a situation where you want a lot more energy. If you can fully make use of how much energy the Sac Greatsword will give you, then having an extra charge of your skill and also a high base attack and some energy recharge will make this weapon a very valuable 4-star option. You'll have 565 base attack, 30 ER, and another chance to use your skill, provided you can proc the effect of Sac Greatsword reliably. Now keep in mind though, another condition I wanted to mention is that you want your Sac Greatsword to be high refinement, as at low refinements it is pretty terrible. Refinement rank 3 would be the minimum, but getting it all the way up to R5 will let you get this passive effect more often, allowing you to more reliably use your skill and have a higher chance of this effect actually proccing, as even at R5 it isn't a 100% chance, so you might always get unlucky and not be able to proc your Sac Greatsword's effect. Keep in mind though that Navia's skill will also have a separate instance of Usia aligned damage, which can trigger the Sacrificial Greatsword's effect, making the effect a bit more reliable to proc. Overall though, having another hit of your skill, which can deal upwards of 6 digits easily, makes it always a pretty decent option, getting better either in solo geo teams where you need a lot of energy, and being especially valuable at lower or medium levels of investment, giving you more skills per rotation, which obviously adds up if your fights last longer. Lastly, regarding the talking stick, it's a pretty good stat stick, but it's generally just worse than Serpent Spine, so I don't recommend going for it on the battle pass, but if you have it, you can use it. Another good 4-star stat stick can be the Lithic Blade if you have Liyue characters on your team, like Zhongli or Xiangling, because it just gives you quite a bit of stats, attack and crit rate, especially with the refinements. With that in mind, I'm now going to put a weapon ranking on screen to help give you guys an idea of where Navia's weapons rank power level wise. Do keep in mind though that this should only be used for a general idea and not an exact ranking of each weapon, because it varies heavily based on your team's rotations and artifacts. What supports you run can affect the weapon ranking, especially if you're not running a support like Bennett who gives you a lot of attack, making attack percent claymores or high base attack claymores all the more valuable. Overall though, Navia has many good weapons to choose from for every type of player. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Navia's constellations. First of all, Navia's first constellation is one that will give her more energy and decrease the cooldown of her skill. In fact, you can get up to 9 energy and a 3-second cooldown reduction on your burst if you consume 3 stacks of your skill when you use it. Since you're typically going to be doing at least a 3-stacked skill anyways, this is a free way to get a lot of energy. On top of that, since you are going to use your skill at least twice per rotation, this will allow you to get up to 18 energy, as the 9 energy limit here is per skill cast, on top of decreasing your burst cooldown by 6 seconds, which may change certain rotations, but in general, the big amount of energy you're gaining here is huge and will allow you to not really need much energy recharge anymore. Moving on, for your second constellation, this will increase the crit rate of your elemental skill by up to 36%, 12% per stack, once again capping out if you consume 3 stacks or more, and this is really good as it'll effectively translate into a lot more damage by allowing you to build more crit damage, attack percent, and just offensive stats instead of crit rate. While you still obviously need crit rate and it's important for the rest of your kit as well, having a free 36% for a big chunk of your damage is honestly very nice. On top of that, when your skill hits an opponent, there will be a cannon fire support shot from your burst that's considered burst damage. This cannon fire should also help you get more crystal shrapnel stacks, which is honestly a great passive. This makes your C2 probably the early stopping point if you want to go for constellations, but I do want to re-emphasize that Navia is perfectly great at C0, and so you shouldn't feel forced to pull for any. Moving on, however, her C3 and 5 will increase your talent levels, with C3 increasing your skills level, which is quite nice. C4 will give you geo resistance shred, which is nice for your personal damage. This res shred will come from your elemental burst's cannon fire, which means you'll get this res shred anytime your burst is active, or through the bonus cannon shots you'll get from your second constellation, if my understanding is correct, which makes it very convenient. Lastly, for your sixth constellation, here you will gain a ton of crit damage for your elemental skill specifically. In contrast with your second constellation, here you will gain 45% crit damage for every stack you consume past 3, meaning you'll gain 45%, 90%, or 135% crit damage to your elemental skill if you consume 4, 5, or 6 stacks respectively. On top of that, any stacks consumed beyond the first 3 are returned to Navia, meaning that you will refund, once again, 3, 2, or 1 stack based on if you consume 6, 5, or 4. This is a pretty nice C6 that will effectively give you 135 crit damage to your skill, refund you some stacks, and will help greatly amplify your burst damage. It doesn't seem game breaking, but it's definitely quite nice, once again, to maximize how much you can deal. Overall, I personally like Navia at C0, but I do think that if you want an early stopping point, C2 can be the way to go, but I do feel like she's a complete unit overall, even without constellations, which is great. Alright, now with all that out of the way, let's talk about Navia's best teams. Now, Navia as a geo carry has a very flexible assortment of teams in the sense that she can kind of be slotted in wherever with existing strong team cores, team archetypes that can fit in 1 or usually 2 geo characters. What I mean by this is pairing her alongside other strong sub DPSs in a way where Navia will get to shine as your on-field carry with good supports assisting her, not really caring too much about most reactions other than crystallize. As you will see with many of the teams in this section, Navia has very high synergy with Bennett as the go-to healer in her teams because he will give you an insane amount of attacks, skyrocketing your damage, on top of having good healing, decent energy generation through his skill, and also a 15-second cooldown on his burst, allowing your rotations to be short and sweet. Also, a lot of healers that are out right now don't have the most synergy with Geo. For example, you can't swirl it with Jean, and so Bennett really is going to be the best option, generally by far, unless you're playing something like a Noelle team, but more on that later. Generally, Bennett is just a great option that synergizes very well with your Navia. With that in mind, if you don't have a Bennett available or don't want to use him, there are alternatives, like some teams that may not even need a healer and can just go off shields, which again, we will cover in this section. I just first of all wanted to mention Bennett's high synergy with Navia. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Navia typically does have good synergy with another geo character, and while there may be a future geo character who's kind of made for her and would want to be ran alongside of her, for now, the best options we have are typically either Zhongli or Albedo. Albedo. These two characters work as good off-field supports. Albedo has passive damage and energy generation, and Zhongli also can give you energy, as well as a strong shield that reduces resistances. You also will get the Geo Resonance, and they're typically the go-to Geo characters if you want another in your team. As I also mentioned earlier, you typically don't want to go overboard with the Geo characters because you still want to get the crystallized reaction on your Navia, but having another one is a good idea. Also, you can use Navia with another character that can spend some field time, like for example Noelle or Ningguang, but more on that later. For now, for her standard teams, here are a few really good ones, but keep in mind that they are very flexible. First of all, you can play Navia with Xiangling, Bennett, and a Geo support for just a ton of damage from both your Navia and your Xiangling. You can also play your Navia in a double Hydra team with characters like Xingqiu and Yelan, who will deal really good off-field damage, once again alongside your Navia on field. You can run Navia in a very hyper carry focused team as well, with pretty much any off-field support. Another good team is Fischl, Bennett, and a Geo flex slot, but you could also run her as a solo Geo as well. You will just need a bit more energy on her if you want to get her burst off cooldown. Navia can be ran with 2 Electro characters like Beidou and Fischl, 2 Hydros, 2 Pyros, or even be slotted in to reaction teams such as Vaporize with Xiangling and Farina, or any form of Electrocharged. Again, as a Geo character, she's very flexible and doesn't really have any specific characters you need to run with her. Personally though, as I said, I recommend running 2 Geos for the most part, and I also believe that Navi is a character who can get a lot of value from many different characters that can damage buff you, like to a certain extent Zhongli, Bennett, who we talked about, and also Farina, who all can give you a ton of damage and make your Navia feel much stronger. Now, one problem with Farina and Navia is that typically there isn't a really great healer that synergizes well in a Navia team. While Bennett is the best go-to option, you do need to understand that Bennett won't heal all of your party members at once, so his synergy with Farina is quite lacking. With that in mind, if you build your Bennett properly and swap through your characters in your rotation, spend some time on each character in your team to heal them up while your Farina's burst is active, you can actually manage to get a good amount of fanfare stacks on your Farina, making her very valuable. What's nice about Navia here in particular is that, as we talked about earlier, Navia is very flexible in her rotations and doesn't need as much uninterrupted field time compared to some other carries. Because of this, you can spend some time healing your characters inside of Bennett's field and even use something like Zhongli's Meteor that other teams may not be able to fit into their rotations. Now, one healer who you may have been shouting about while I've been talking that can work in a Geo team is obviously Noelle, and Noelle Navia Frida teams can actually work quite decently. Now, Noelle does need a lot of field time, but you can use your Navia for a little bit on field, use your skills, and then swap out, and Noelle can heal all of your party, get buffed with Farina, and also get a ton of energy through Navia, with every Geo character here kind of batterying each other, buffing each other, and also having pretty decent synergy, especially with Farina's buffs. The last slot here can be Goro, Bennett, or Flex, and it is a pretty interesting team where Navia has more of a sub DPS role. On a similar note, for a sub DPS Navia team, I think there's some experimentation to be done, notably in Geo teams like this one or with Ningguang, or also with some other carries like Linny, who can benefit from just a mono Pyro or Pyro Geo duo team, or even be ran alongside Neuvillette just for some skill damage and an extra reaction to synergize with this passive. Overall though, for most people, I recommend running Navia in a team where she shines with an existing team core that makes sense. For example, through my experience, I really like running her in a team full of really powerful supports like Farina, Bennett, Zhongli, or one with Fischl, Bennett, Zhongli, and Albedo also works here, or using her with 2 Hydro characters like Xingqiu, Yelan, or Farina with a healer. Additionally, in solo Geo teams, I actually found her quite powerful with Farina, Xiangling, Bennett, a variation of National where my Navia was on Sack Greatsword and was performing surprisingly well. With that in mind, I'm now going to get into a Navia showcase of my Navia in a team where she gets to hyper carry, which will be paired alongside Farina, Bennett, and Zhongli. While a few clips of this video had my Navia on her signature weapon and golden troop, for now what I did is I put her on Serpent Spine R5, a 4-star weapon but a battle pass one, so that's what I'm going to be using. She is on 4-piece Maréchaussée as I can't farm the new set, and this is her go-to set with Farina anyways, so very efficient. On level 8, 9, 8 talents, Constellation 0, and a very good crit ratio when you factor in the extra 36% I'm gaining from Maréchaussée, and also there was a crit card this Abyss, so effectively really high crit rate because of this set, on top of very high crit damage, 120 ER, and 105 wasted elemental mastery, but we don't talk about that. With that in mind, I really hope you enjoyed the guide, and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. Let's go. overall, as you can see, Navia is a very satisfying and strong main DPS that I really enjoy and who I've had a lot of fun playing. Now, as with a lot of my recent videos, I hope you enjoyed the depth. This is a longer video than usual. I hope you appreciate all the information I put in, all the time I put in. Feedback's really appreciated, and I'll try to be quicker with guides in the future. Maybe a first impressions and then a guide. I don't know. I like making detailed guides, but I don't want to make people wait for too long, so I'm not sure. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was helpful. As always, if there's anything you want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, so be sure to check that. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.